get your gun, on the run, on the run. Hear them calling you and me, everyone for liberty. Hurry right away, no delay, start today. Make your daddy glad to have had such a lad. Tell your sweetheart not to pine, to be proud, our boys in line. Over there, send the word over there, that the Yanks are coming, the drum coming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer, send the word to beware. Act till it's over there. Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Johnny, show the Hun you're a son of the gun. Hoist the flag and let her fly. Yankee doodle do or die. Pack your little chit, show your grit, do your bit. The Yankees go the ranks from the towns and the tanks. Make your mother proud of you and the old red, white, and blue. Over there, send the word over there, that the Sammies are coming, the drum coming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer, send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there, over there. Send the word over there, that the Sammies are coming, the drum coming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer, send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there.
All right, good afternoon. If you all could take your seats, we'll get started. Diane, don't leave. If you'll take your seats, we'll get started. Thank you. All right, it's my pleasure now to introduce Colonel Retired Doug Morrison from Susi Defense International as our Tech 10 this afternoon. Give him a big round of applause.
Well, I can see AUSA continues with a good sense of humor in that they have a cavalryman after lunch and it looks like it's a full house. But also, I think General Fortin is the DCG of I-Corps, a Canadian officer, so I'm talking about Susi Defense, a Canadian company. So that works out pretty well. Next chart, please. This is the agenda I'll follow. The vehicle that's shown up here is an Ares from the UK. It's optimized, the CAD that you see there, it's optimized with the track at about 40 metric tons. And when I show weights in this presentation, they are all metric tons. So I didn't do well at math at West Point, so you got to bear with me on those. Next chart. This is the history of SUSE International, which SUSE Defense is a part. Started about 40 years ago. It's a privately held company, small, family-owned business in Canada. Started out with snowmobile track, and now what we call composite rubber track for combat vehicles along with agricultural applications and recreational applications. TRL 7 at about 42 metric tons. Next chart. This shows the market that we're in. BV series of vehicles, U.S. Army Alaska uses those, the Marine Corps uses those, as well as other nations. M113s, CV90 by BAE Hägglunds, combat proven in Afghanistan, and the heaviest from an operational perspective vehicle where the composite rubber track is deployed at about 42 metric tons. Next chart. So composite rubber track. Some of you may have heard about it, rubber band track. The Army looked at it for, U.S. Army looked at it for the Future Combat System. Technology has changed significantly over the last 10 years or so. Composite rubber track. It is an end-to-end engineered solution. Comes with a split idler and sprocket, half sprocket that allows easy installation. We showcased it with BAE Systems at the MCOE Warfighter last September, and it took us about 12 minutes to actually get it installed on one side of a vehicle. It is a composite track, about 51% composite material, steel. There's about a mile of steel cord that provides the longitudinal and torsional stiffness for the track. You can take out about 40% of any track block and it'll still be fully functional, fully operational. The rubber compound is about 49%, but it's about 12 different rubber compounds using natural rubber and other materials depending on the construction of the particular solution that's needed for the platform. Next chart. This is a high-level set of advantages of composite rubber track, and we focus on survivability. We are at operational reach, so how do we help the platform survive in a very complex environment? And you're looking at a system improvement. So it's not necessarily the track that's providing that survivability, but what it allows the platform to do and some of the things that you can add to the platform. So for example, noise reduction is by about 70%, improves your stealth. Reduced vibration, which helps both electronics, ammunition, and crew sustainment. Reduced fuel consumption, so again, extended operational reach, or as we've talked about already at the conference, reducing your sustainment burden. And so the key thing here that I would also highlight is the avoid penetration and kill. Again, indirectly, because it allows you to do some things with the platform, with the weight budget, with the weight savings for either active protection systems, added spall liner, slat armor, those sorts of improvements. It adds to that flexibility for the platform. Next chart, please. And just to drill down on that a little bit further, so you see the vehicle on the left side of the chart, notional representation of a vehicle potentially in Afghanistan or in an operational theater. The 1,700 kilograms for a steel track, that's the lightest weight steel track that we know of. There's been some performance trials on that. It has some durability issues. The average steel track is about 2,100 kilometers. And so you can see that over on the right-hand side of the chart, we give you about 40% of that back that can be used for other applications or other capabilities on the platform. Next chart. Important in the Indo-Asia-Pacific theater, amphibious operations, no corrosion. That has a significant impact, obviously, on steel track. And as I said, I highlighted my West Point education. I got a C in physics. There's a guy by the name of Archimedes who had this discussion about buoyancy. We've got smart engineers that handle that, but what I will tell you is that when you compare steel to composite rubber track, it's about a 6% improvement, 6 times improvement over your floatability, if you will. The other thing is that depending on the propulsion of that amphibious platform, we can provide a faster speed if it's a water jet or a propulsive system versus a track-driven system. Next chart. And again, just drilling down a little bit further on amphibious platforms, given the importance for this theater. Mentioned the lower weight of the track, propellers or water propulsion system is more efficient. The comment about the aluminum road wheel structure instead of steel, again, that's a better application for an amphibious system. And SUSE does work when it comes to the road wheel structure, the road wheel construction, and where it's placed on the platform. If it's designed from the bottom up, obviously we have more flexibility than if it's just a retrofit to an existing platform. But the aluminum road wheels saved weight as well as providing a benefit in terms of rust and corrosion. And again, it's about 6 times lighter when you look at the overall steel track application. Next chart, please. So we get a lot of questions about battle damage assessment and, okay, it's a continuous track system. What happens if it blows up in an IED or a mine strike? STANAG level 1, not an issue. Take a chunk out of the track, as I said, about 40% on any given section of the track, and it's still maintaining its combat readiness. You can take out up to 7 in a row, and the only impact, so to speak, there is not in the tension of the track, but in the fact that you need sprocket drive to be able to grab the track. So STANAG 4, take the track out, but it'll also require, whether it's steel track or composite rubber track, you're going to have to recover the vehicle. This kit, though, provides a limp home capability, so about 100 miles or 150 kilometers or thereabouts, and you can move at pretty rapid pace in terms of putting the repair kit on. Next chart. So why SUSE? You got all the advantages of the composite rubber track, but there are a couple of things that SUSE brings to the table that even some of our competitors who look at a composite structure don't have. And that is the IP in terms of the compounding process and the construction of the track, the fibers that are used, and in this case, the SUSE-Preen trademark, which uses Kevlar elastomer and carbon nanotube structures, helps dissipate the heat in the track, but also helps with a chip cut and flaking off of parts of the track and improves the durability. Next chart. So in sum, this is kind of an overview chart. Reduced noise by up to 70%, reduced vibration, which has secondary effect across a platform when it's electronics, sensors, ammunition, crew, fatigue. It's also overall a better life cycle cost in terms of not having to replace track pads, not having your soldiers in the motor pool that have to walk track or replace track pads or to tighten the track tension. Next chart. And of course, the most important thing is that the armies that have switched to the track have switched completely, and the troops are the ones that have the vote. And that picture actually is I'm not sure if he's in here, Major retired King's Royal Hussars Kevin Sloan from the UK, works with me with SUSE. He's here as well. If you have any questions, I've got 50 seconds, and then you can come out and see us at our booth, please. No questions, great. I yield back my 40 seconds of time.
Well, thanks, Doug, and thanks especially to SUSE for that great presentation. The team will be around for follow-up questions that you may have. Well, welcome back. I hope you had an opportunity to visit the exhibitors and enjoy the great lunch presented by General Dynamics Mission Systems. Again, hearty thanks to General Dynamics Mission Systems for doing that. We return now for this afternoon's panel, Preventing Crisis While Preparing for War, Ensuring Readiness in a Region of Conflict and Competition. So building on this morning's conversation, we'll start off with a tag team from the First Corps. And keeping in consistent with the theme of multinational efforts, the panel moderator is the Deputy Commander, Commanding General of First Corps, though a Canadian officer, Brigadier General Fortin. And Danny, we welcome you. And the panel chair is the First Corps Commander, Lieutenant General Gary Valesky. So the panel, welcome, and thank you very much for preparing for this presentation. Off to you, sir.
Well, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege and honor to introduce this panel today. As the title of this presentation suggests, this panel will discuss how U.S. Forces can maximize existing and future training opportunities in the Indo-Asia Pacific area of responsibility to build and sustain readiness, build capabilities with allies and partners in an increasingly complex and uncertain theater, enabling credible deterrence and fostering reassurance without triggering miscalculations and creating increased tension with potential adversaries. So let me introduce our panel members. The chair of the panel, of course, is Lieutenant General Gary Valesky, the Commanding General of America's First Corps and Joint Base Lewis McChord, Washington. Dr. Finkelstein will start our discussion today and outline key dynamics of the region and share his perspective on known and anticipated threats and interests of players associated with those threats. Dr. Horowitz will discuss the joint integration of capabilities for increased effectiveness and resiliency to get our military in more favorable position given the threats and opportunities presented. And you can find, of course, the biographies of those two great academics on the website. Rear Admiral Mercado, the Director of Maritime Operations at Pacific Fleet. Major General Malavitt, the CG of Marine Corps Installation Pacific. And Colonel Kaczynski, the Commander of 62nd Airlift Wing, will share their perspectives on power projection, training opportunities in the so what, and discuss the ongoing initiatives within their commands. Finally, Command Sergeant Major Lambert, the senior enlisted in U.S. Army Pacific, will outline how tasks associated with exercises in the Pacific directly contribute to readiness at echelon from the tactical to operational. So let me now transition to Dr. Finkelstein, who will set the stage for our discussion. Dr. Finkelstein.
Thank you. Many thanks to General Valesky and AUSA for the opportunity to be on this panel. At the Center for Naval Analyses back in Arlington, Virginia, I direct our China program, which is pretty large these days. We have 20+ analysts looking at Chinese military security affairs and regional security affairs every day, all in support of organizations across the U.S. government. And I proudly tell you that we're celebrating our 75th anniversary, established in 1942 to support the Navy and Marine Corps and still going strong. In my few minutes, I'd like to pick up on the subtitle of this panel, which is the Indo-Asia Pacific as a region of conflict and competition. Now, when I think about the potential for conflict these days, of course, I'm thinking about the Korean Peninsula. And when I think about competition in the PACOM AOR, China certainly comes to mind. Certainly, recent events have underscored for the general public that which this informed audience already knew for a long time, specifically that the possibility of conflict on the Korean Peninsula is very real and has been for a while. The much heightened tensions of late help us to focus the mind on just how dangerous the situation remains some 64 years after the signing of the armistice in Panmunjom, where as a young Army 03 I served many, many years ago. Indeed, I would assert that the prospect of hostilities on the Korean Peninsula remains the most potentially dangerous scenario in the entire Indo-Asia Pacific region. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves that there are at least 5 factors that make the possibility of a Korea conflict extremely dangerous. The first, of course, is the intensity of national interests among the key actors, with Seoul and Pyongyang having survival-level, existential-level interests hanging in the balance, and the U.S. and China both having, at a minimum, vital national security interests at stake. So the stakes are high for the key players. Second is the nuclear factor. The interests of 3 nuclear-armed countries will be entangled in any conflict scenario on the peninsula: the U.S., China, and the DPRK. This really is a sobering reality to keep in the back of our minds. Third is the potential for the situation to escalate or involve other regional actors. Obviously, friends in Japan will not be disinterested parties, and Russia will certainly perceive itself to have interests on the line in any Korea scenario. The fourth factor that makes this potentially dangerous and catastrophic is the likelihood of miscalculation. China, the DPRK, and the US-ROK alliance will each likely have very different situational understanding of what is transpiring, as well as different assumptions about the interests and the options of each of the other parties. And fifth and finally, though by no means last in importance, is understanding the collateral damage and destruction in any Korea scenario. This will be horrific, or as Secretary Mattis said just 5 days ago, quote, tragic on an unbelievable scale. So while this is a conflict we must absolutely prepare for, it's also a conflict we also must avoid if at all possible. And avoiding such a conflict, if possible, is what our government and others seem to be working on at the moment, even as we sit here in Honolulu. And one of those other governments that we are talking to about Korea is the government of the People's Republic of China, which brings me to the issue of competition. I would suggest that the most significant post-Cold War development with long-term strategic implications for the Indo-Asia Pacific and beyond is the emergence of China as a national actor of consequence. Grounded in Beijing's current economic heft and coupled with the PRC's evolving military capabilities, the China factor is increasingly at work in both the foreground and background of security dynamics across the region, alongside our own presence, policies, and programs. Whether talking about developments on the Korean Peninsula, the security of the sea lanes of communication, territorial disputes in Asia, both on land and sea, not just on sea, but also on land, or the very future of the security architecture in the Indo-Asia Pacific, the China factor is increasingly at play at one level or another. So how U.S.-China relations play out in the coming years will be a significant factor in defining the future political, economic, and security landscape of the PACOM AOR. And as it has evolved to date, this relationship between the U.S. and China is extremely complex, and you could describe it, I think, as a tangled and messy web of issues, some of which impel cooperation when our national interests coincide, but another set of issues that produce great contention and certainly competition. Now, the combination of simultaneous cooperation and competition between Washington and Beijing holds across the board in the political, economic, and defense affairs. And in the realms of defense and military affairs, the competitive dimensions of the U.S.-China relationship are most pronounced right here in the Indo-Asia Pacific region. Geostrategically, this competition is taking place primarily in the littorals, where traditional U.S. operational predominance in the maritime and aerospace domains and China's expanding offshore reach and increasing operational capabilities are intersecting. But the competition is also one of competing military modernizations. As most of you know, in late 2015, the Chinese armed forces were launched into an unprecedented period of reorganization and reform that will continue for the next few years. You might say that they are undergoing their own Goldwater Nichols moment. And when they are finished, the PRC armed forces aspire to emerge as a more capable warfighting force that can conduct joint operations across multiple battle space domains, the very same domains that General Brown discussed this morning and in his recent article on multi-domain battle concept. Now, if there's interest, we can talk more about the Chinese military reform and modernization during Q&A. So at the moment, the U.S.-China dynamic of cooperation and competition, I think, is resulting in great uncertainty in the Asia-Pacific region. There is uncertainty because some countries are concerned about what this competition means for their own interests and policies going forward, with some, unsurprisingly, prepared to hedge their bets. There is uncertainty about the policies China will employ to secure its national interests in the region. This is one reason among many why people in the region are looking to see how China behaves in the South China Sea, perhaps as a litmus test of China's future policy proclivities. There is uncertainty in some quarters of the region, frankly, about the future policies of the United States in this part of the world, especially with the U.S. having demurred from the Trans-Pacific Partnership most recently. And for what it's worth, a very senior diplomat from the region, a foreign diplomat from the region, quipped to me the other day that if the U.S. is not a leader in Asia economically, then the U.S. is absent strategically, for what it's worth. And there are uncertainties attendant to a situation in which some countries in the region are looking to China for their economic well-being, while at the same time looking to the United States to underwrite their national security and preserve the regional order that for many decades has allowed stability and unquestionable economic prosperity to be the hallmarks of the Asia-Pacific. So what does all of this mean for the ground forces, indeed all forces in the PACOM AOR? Well, three big things. First and foremost, operational readiness is the foremost order of business. The Army and its sister services do not have the luxury of rationalizing away the possibility of conflict, no matter how horrific to contemplate, even in Korea. So warfighting capability has to be paramount. Second, I think we need to work hard at our alliances and our defense relationships and partnerships. Our defense relationships are the source of collective strength that allows the United States and its partners and allies to secure our shared and individual national security interests in the region. So we have to work at that. Politically, in the face of mounting pressures and uncertainties, we should never take our allies, partners, and friends for granted. That goes without saying. But operationally, this means that interoperability and growing the habits of combined operations is the key. And third, reassurance. Especially in these early days of a new U.S. administration, it's necessary to provide reassurance that the U.S. remains committed to a long-term presence in the region, is dedicated to honoring our treaty obligations, and is prepared to continue to underwrite the security architecture which I mentioned before has brought prosperity and stability to all. And to this end, I think the recent visits to the region by Secretary Mattis, Secretary Tillerson, and Vice President Pence went a long way symbolically to making that point. But equally as important as periodic high-level political visits will be the persistent presence of operationally credible, forward-deployed U.S. military forces, something Admiral Mercado and I were talking about before we began here. And in this regard, among the other services, the U.S. Army, as a member of the Joint Team, has much to offer, which can be boiled down, I think, into three words: fight, enable, and shape. As for fight, the U.S. Army must continue to be a credible land power fighting force to deter and, if need be, defeat aggression in the ground fight. But the Army must also help bring effects to domains other than in the land battle, and this, of course, is the new challenge and the new opportunity. As for enable, at the strategic, operational, and tactical levels, the U.S. Army remains a key enabler of the joint fight by virtue of many of its assets. Among others, those capabilities include air and missile defense, SOF, engineers, communications, cyber, transportation, and logistics. And finally, shape. The U.S. Army's day-to-day regional engagement plays a fundamental role, along with the sister services, in shaping the strategic, operational, and political security environment. Whether operating in the Philippines, sending cadets to China, carrying out National Guard exchanges in the region, or dispatching Army attachés to embassies, the Army's shaping role, along with its sister services, really is vital to communicating intent and influencing others in the region to address shared interests. So thanks for your attention. I'll leave it there for now.
Hey, thank you very much, sir. Dr. Horowitz.
Thanks. To start, I want to thank AUSA for hosting this event and General Volesky for giving me the opportunity to speak to all of you. As an academic who has moonlighted at times in the U.S. Department of Defense, it's a great honor to speak in front of so many talented people that give so much to our country. And I want to cut to the chase up front and tell you my three bottom lines. The first is something that you've already heard about a little bit in the morning, which is that rapidly diffusing commercial technology with military relevance, as well as the general proliferation of precision strike capabilities, is placing U.S. conventional overmatch at risk. As General Milley said in October, we are on the cusp of a fundamental change in the character of warfare, and specifically ground warfare. Second, harnessing the capabilities of the future will place more cognitive demands on the warfighter, as they have to fight and make decisions at machine speed. This means preparing and training, not just developing new technological widgets, especially when U.S. adversaries will increasingly have their own advanced capabilities. And it means a key role of technology will be in helping relieve that cognitive complexity for U.S. decision makers. And the requirements for implementing multi-domain battle are thus more human and bureaucratic than anything else. They're about the willingness of the land forces to adapt to an uncertain security environment despite being the best in the world today. And third, the force development challenge here is therefore crucial. We have end strength, modernization, and readiness. They come into budgetary tension, but all are necessary to build the capacity to fight and win in the Pacific. The FY18 budget submission to Congress, in my opinion, is not enough to overcome the modernization deficit facing the land forces in particular. Now I want to go into depth a little bit on each of those points. Most broadly, I think it's important to recognize the way the requirements for land power in the Pacific are extremely diverse. From the Korean Peninsula, potential distributed operations in Southeast Asia, to protecting Guam. That means we need diverse ground forces as well, capable of walking and chewing gum as they deter these conflicts from occurring, or winning these conflicts as they start. And these are different challenges than the challenges that the land forces have mostly been dealing with over the last 15 years. The Taliban, ISIS, insurgents in Iraq, Al-Qaeda, but those conflicts aren't going away either, which means preparing for the Pacific cannot come at the expense of fighting today's wars. The problem is that the future is coming faster than I think we might like. And it's a future where commercial markets will cause bleeding edge technologies to spread faster than the key technologies of past generations, such as stealth. And I'm talking here about the key technologies that are part of the third offset: artificial intelligence, robotics, 3D printing, cyber, directed energy, and others. The larger the commercial applications of a technology in general, the faster it spreads due to market forces. We need to internalize that these emerging technologies are more like the combustion engine of the 21st century than a new type of rifle. They'll be part of everything, and thus many will have access, from allies and partners to adversaries. And the rapid diffusion of militarily relevant dual-use technology means what we can expect is more countries with layered A2AD networks and other capabilities that challenge U.S. access to air, space, and cyberspace in particular, as well as the ability of the United States to project power over distance, which means the role of land power in the Pacific, if anything, is likely to grow. So what does this mean? This requires, as many have said, not just jointness as we've traditionally thought about it over the last few decades, but a larger emphasis on joint integration. It will also require more collaboration with allies and partners. And I'm talking about multi-domain battle in the context of three things. One, the broad organizational challenge of adoption. Two, leveraging technology without relying on it. And three, force planning. So the first, the broad organizational challenge. The US military is the best in the world, and it's the best in the world because of its people. But adapting is really hard for leading military powers like the United States. Rising powers like China have less to lose by taking chances. which can make them potential hotbeds of experimentation when it comes to tactics and doctrine. It's hard to generate the bureaucratic impetus to adapt when every day you wake up and you're already the best. Thus, the United States needs to develop what my research calls the adoption capacity to respond to a changing world, a world where the Army needs to sink ships and rapid cross-domain fires are essential. I think the good news here is that what we're talking about is going back to organizational basics, combined arms for the 21st century, fueled by emerging technologies that empower the warfighter. Thus, the critical task focus necessary to adopt multi-domain battle should be consistent with the Army and Marine Corps' DNA, something that will hopefully speed adoption. Second thing is leveraging technology, but not relying on it. Emerging technologies provide an opportunity to bolster the effectiveness of land forces, and there are lots of examples of this. But the examples sometimes aren't what actually filters into the media. In the area of autonomous systems, for example, terms like killer robots and autonomous weapon systems conjure images of the Terminator. But that's not reality for the way that autonomous systems will help the land forces fight at machine speed in the Pacific. Precision targeting and autonomy-enabled defense already exist and help make land forces faster, more efficient, and more accurate. There's not going to be a magical line between that and the next generation of autonomy. And we need to recognize that technology in any form is ultimately a tool used by the military and civilian leadership, and we're accountable for how we use it and the decisions that are made. The best thing we can do then is understand the possibilities of these technologies better than our adversaries, which means understanding their limitations as well as their promise. But the worst thing we can do is pretend that this changing world isn't coming or abdicate our responsibility to control the strategy. The third thing is, how do we size and shape the force for multi-domain battle in the Pacific and beyond? I think a key part of this is building flexible, resilient formations. Ground forces are going to require cross-domain fires. In that vein, the modification to the Army Tactical Missile System to enable it to fire on ships is a step in the right direction, as is the possibility of linking together Army and Navy radars to provide more cohesive air defenses. And the interaction of maneuver and fire also becomes critical. And there are a variety of modernization priorities the Army has been pursuing, including the Armored Multi-Purpose Vehicle, the Paladin Integrated Management Program, and the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle. A key issue, though, is whether these capabilities will be fielded fast enough. It's a race against time right now in fielding these capabilities to enable smaller units to deploy faster and more successfully. Smaller units essentially are going to need more and faster access to cross-domain capabilities. Active protection systems for the defense, harnessing robotics and autonomous systems for the offense, as well as precision fires. This means speed and resupply are essential. Think human-machine teaming that leverages autonomy, and capabilities such as 3D printing to facilitate resupply on the battlefield. Stepping back a little bit, the increase in RDT&A for the Army in the FY18 budget request is a good start from a long-term perspective, but more clearly bolstering modernization in particular is necessary. And force structure is not enough on its own, especially if funding active duty end strength comes at the expense of modernization and readiness. Especially in the Pacific, end strength matters. You need people where they have to be. But modernization and readiness will be critical. This is especially true because the ground forces are going to need to control more forces in a multi-domain world. A consequence of emerging technologies being based in commercial technology is that red will be able to catch up faster every time blue innovates. As innovation cycle timelines shrink, we need to produce faster and en masse. In other words, as Deputy Secretary Work said, mass is back. Not the mass army, but soldiers controlling or working with other services to control masses of sensors, shooters, and other equipment. In this way, a good news story in the defense budget proposal are the technology demonstration fundings related to drone swarms, the EW spectrum, and directed energy. We need to change the cost exchange ratio when the US and its allies and partners use force. We can't continue to hear stories like Patriot missiles being used to shoot down Amazon quadcopters, as reportedly happened earlier this year. That's not a cost curve that will be sustainable in a serious conventional fight in the Pacific. And in other ways, as referenced above, this is going to make the small unit commander, as well as the battalion commander, more important than ever before for two reasons. First, as technology becomes more complicated, commanders will have to make rapid decisions that incorporate a greater understanding of how different capabilities interact across domains. This means the selection and promotion of commanders must emphasize those with the knowledge to fight in a multi-domain environment. And second, in a world of proliferated precision strike, where adversaries can generate fires across domains, that's a world that requires a more Spartan approach to warfare, as the Chief of Staff has said, with ground units constantly on the move. That means decentralizing operations. That's a particular challenge in the Pacific, where just the fact of maneuver requires working with other services to get from point A to point B. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about the way implementation of multi-domain battle requires rhetoric about supporting creativity and experimentation within the land forces to become more of a reality. We already know this from US military history. Carrier warfare in World War II did not emerge from smoke. It emerged from 2 decades of tabletop gaming and real-world operational experience. Similarly, air-land battle wasn't conjured into reality. It was forced there by a generation of commanders that did the hard bureaucratic work to train and equip the force for the late Cold War. And there's a temptation then in every generation to say that the threats we face are more complicated and difficult than those faced by our predecessors. Let's be honest, there's a little bit of hubris there. We all think that what we're facing is more complicated than anything anybody else has dealt with. But that doesn't make it not complicated. It doesn't make it not challenging. But addressing those challenges in the Pacific, I think, will start with joint integration, given the diversity of issues that the ground forces face. And for multi-domain battle to succeed, it will therefore require adoption in a way that not only shapes end strength, but modernization and readiness as well. Thank you.
General Volesky, sir.
Hey, General Ham, thanks a lot for inviting us today. This is the first opportunity I've had to sit on a panel, so watch out. As you've heard highlighted by the panel, the complexity of the PACOM AOR demands our persistent engagement in the region. You've heard about the threats of North Korea, China, and Russia, and you could say that the amount of competition and potential for conflict in the region seems higher than it has been at any point over a number of decades. And so where's the Army fit? Our Army, as part of a joint team, must be ready today and in the future to defeat our adversaries across multiple domains. While no one wants major conflict, we must be ready now to decisively defeat our adversaries. And I want to tell you first, standing JTF in the PACOM AOR. So we take this pretty seriously. So how are we? Will serve as the first time as a combined task force lead in a major PACOM exercise, Talisman Sabre, demonstrating the importance of winning decisively on the land in the Pacific. And that's our validation from PACOM to be a standing JTF. But it doesn't stop there. A month or so later, we'll go to All-Chief Freedom Guardian in Korea and follow that with an Army warfighter, the Army's validation of the First Corps to be a JTF in combat. So we're going to do in First Corps in 5 months what most Army Corps do in 2 years. As you've heard about before, this area is home to 7 of the 10 largest armies with a lot of the megacities and half the world's population. But the key is partnership. As you know, the likelihood of us conducting unilateral operations anywhere in the world is probably not high. So engagement and clear messaging among the key actors in the region are vital to preventing conflict. And combined exercises with our partners achieve some of this prevention we're looking for. But exercises can't just be exercises. They have to be focused on readiness. As the Chief of Staff of the Army has said, The number one priority is readiness. There are no other number ones. And so that's what First Corps is looking at in every one of these exercises. We must apply the mental rigor when planning for them with our joint team, our partners, and our allies to ensure that they're tied into furthering the theater security cooperation objectives, but also enhancing, building, and maximizing our readiness. The life cycle of these exercises require continuous refinement. We must lay out the measures of not only performance, but effectiveness, so we can measure the capabilities that we built amongst our coalition, our teammates, and the message that we're sending out to the would-be adversaries, and take these lessons that we've learned to make the following exercises even that more rigorous and that much more tied to learning. That way we can make sure that exercises are no longer considered consumers of readiness, rather they build readiness and they communicate readiness that enable us to deter while we prepare for and rehearse our actions on contact. Our efforts to build combined capabilities in the region occur in an information environment, however, where other state and non-state actors will make decisions based on the actions they perceive or our intentions. That's why some of these exercises must be focused at that. As you've heard, these exercises will provide opportunities to innovate and to enhance readiness at every echelon, and to devise multi-organizational solutions and lessons learned for multi-domain fighting. As the JTF Action Arm for USERPAC and the Army's executive agent for multi-domain battle, America's First Corps has been given the mission to operationalize the multi-domain task force. We have been asked to build upon the existing multi-domain battle best practices, test and experiment with MDB concepts, and capture lessons learned that will inform further concept development. The exercises that we'll participate in will also give us the opportunity to look at, with a refined scope, on MDB capabilities that we want to progress and research in the future, as well as to innovate and experiment and collaborate that will yield new capabilities. Over the next year, our 17th Fires Brigade will be the base headquarters with mission-specific task organization and staff augmentation, and we will integrate them into the MD Task Force pilot into the USERPAC exercise program that will begin with Talisman Sabre, which will include a live fire exercise demonstration during RIMPAC 18 and culminate with the execution of Pacific Pathways during FY19 using the entire multi-domain task force. As we conduct these operations, we must measure the effects of our engagements with partners, allies, and other regional actors, and look at their impact on regional security. As you know, future conflict will inevitably require interagency and coalition partners' participation and impact our ability to project power across all domains. This underscores the importance of these exercises and the other multinational training opportunities we have. 5 months ago, I would argue we demonstrated or experimented with MDB version 1. I returned from Iraq where the mission there was to really enable decisive maneuver that was conducted by Iraqi security forces. Many of us in the audience have spent multiple tours in Iraq over the last 15 years. But I will tell you what was different this time was that the Iraqis were in the lead. No longer did we have ground maneuver units seizing terrain. So it really made us look at how we could enable that maneuver, because they had to fight and they had to win it. So what we saw were a clear requirement to determine what the priorities were and what authorities that we had to enable Iraqi maneuver. And I will tell you, you've heard over the last few panels about the discussion of priorities, authorities, what we need, how we would go about getting them. What I would tell you, coalition warfare is more important today than it ever has been. I would argue you don't need to own the authority or own the unit to get the effect on the enemy. For example, cyber. I did not have the authorities as the JFLIC commander of Iraq to employ cyber, but the Australians did, and so did the UK. My deputy commanding general was Australian, so how did we incorporate cyber? When I didn't have those authorities, I'd look at my DCG and say, what do you think we could do to get Australia to help? And what we realized was we got the opportunity to develop a community of practice that would enable us, because they had shared interests, to enable Iraqi maneuvers. So they were the ones that would look at what effect we wanted to get over time, and they would apply it, synchronized on the commander's priorities. So in my mind, the future of MDB is going to reside more on commanders articulating their priorities, understanding what authorities they need and who owns them, and then creating a unity of effort to get the effects you want. I would tell you targeting must evolve. A lot of the discussion I've heard here was about lethal targeting, kinetic actions. I will tell you in the future, especially in MDB, non-lethal targeting will take on as much of an important role as lethal targeting will. And in fact, I would tell you at times be more important. And then how do you leverage every tool in the kit bag on those non-lethal capabilities you need to enable that decisive maneuver? How many times have you heard about a diplomat being a non-lethal, providing a non-lethal effect on a target that you were looking at? I'll give you an example. When in 2004, Shia militia groups were some of the bad actors that we were going against in 2004. Some of those same personalities were leading Shia groups that were endorsed by the army or the Iraqi government. So how do you shape, how do you sway the Iraqi government to enable you not to do or them to do a mission or cause and effect that could be counterproductive to the mission? So how do you use your diplomats? How do you use other key stakeholders to go communicate things that get an effect, not on necessarily an enemy, but shape someone else that can provide a long-term effect? That's also, in my mind, part of MDB. And then finally, we need to do a better job in social media. Open source intelligence will become, I think, as important as compartmentalized intelligence. I can tell you there were many times in Iraq I heard things over television or watched it in social media that were only corroborated a day later by compartmentalized intelligence. I don't think we do a good enough job, and so that's something we'll have to leverage in the future to make sure we can really get after the enemy in a holistic way. Thank you.
Admiral Mercado, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. General Ham, good to see you, sir. And General Volesky, good to see you again, sir. Thanks for allowing me to be on this panel. You know, this is my first time at an Army event, really. And I thought I would feel like a fish out of water, but actually I don't. It's surprising to me. I've spent a lot of my 06 time in the Joint Arena, Joint Staff OSD, CENTCOM. So I really feel at home, and I think I feel best at home is because I understand your eval system and your rating scheme. So, and also having worked with General Volesky and his team at First Corps recently, I do feel part of a member of First Corps. Okay, so now, and I also think you're going to be a beneficiary of, because, you know, almost the worst happened is I had some prepared remarks knowing I'm going to be in front of an Army audience. My driver drove off with them. So what you're going to get is a stream of consciousness. When you're a flag officer, you say, keep an eye on your speech. I failed in that, so now you're going to get a stream of consciousness here. So when we talk about preventing crisis while preparing for war, let me tell you what, a memo came across my desk, and I see a lot of them, and it had DIME. You know, we know DIME, Fill, PMEZ. What I saw was interesting is they had an M in small, lowercase. And I thought about that and said, that's the absolute wrong acronym. Because if you look at what we provide, and I would say, and I learned this from Colonel Dave to agree, is that a strong military provides the foundation for all those other elements of power. And to a degree, I learned this recently, a strong military provides the stability that underpins economic prosperity. So for anyone to say that these are individual elements of power, they're short-sighted. So that's our job. So what I do as the Director of Maritime Ops in the Pacific Fleet, owning, and Admiral Swift was here, so I got to be careful. If I say anything different, my boss, raise your hand and correct me, and I will correct it. But it's all about generating credible combat power, okay? And for what? For a phase 2 fight for victory against a peer adversary or near peer adversary. That's what we're all about. Anything short of that, we are being incompetent, okay? And I will tell you now, in the maritime environment in the Pacific, I say maritime because that's my lane, we cannot win, Navy cannot win alone. And we do have the preponderance of forces of the Navy in the Pacific, 60%. I will say in a maritime environment, we need joint fires. I cannot achieve maritime superiority, sea control, without joint fires. I don't have enough ships. The ocean is vast. So it's great for us to realize that, hey, there is a benefit to land-based fires. There's sea-based, there's air-based, there's land-based. We cannot be everywhere, and it's a combined effort to achieve and maintain maritime superiority. Now, how we do this in the Navy, much of you know this, is we run our ships and carrier strike groups through a rigorous training workup from maintenance to, no kidding, high-end readiness. So we start at a basic phase after maintenance. We have type commanders that do that to all our forces. Then we bring them together in a composite unit exercise, and we run them through hell. When you're done with Comp 2X, you are tired. You feel like you can do magic. I mean, you are at the peak of readiness. And then what do? We deploy. And here's the challenge. We're in a phase 0 environment. So we send our strike groups forward. They do what they can. They do low-end missions, and that high skill starts to atrophy. So the challenge is, how do we maintain that edge? Because we have to be ready if called upon. You know, we take advantage of some bombing ranges that we have. We try to do a lot more in the virtual environment. Unfortunately, from a bureaucratic standpoint, when we build some of these systems, we are overly cautious. We don't trust our commanders, and we say, my God, we can't give you a virtual environment when you are at sea because that is so dangerous. Well, I can tell you what the good COs do out there, they take and they put themselves in a virtual environment, and they have part of their watch stations keep an eye on safety of navigation. So the fleet has been doing it. It's taken too long for industry and bureaucrats to figure this out, that we need to do synthetic training at sea. So that's one piece. The other part is there's a difference between training and assessments. Too often we go through this training, at the end, you know, you're stressed, and then you solve world hunger and you win the war. You learn nothing. You know, if you hear Admiral Swift talk, is we need to train to failure. And we try to do that. There's a difference between training and assessments. So what we're going to in the Pacific, after they are done with their Comp 2X and they deploy, we are looking at options to now assess. We're not interested. I am not interested in a strike group comes through Hawaii for them to say, they won the war, look how they did. You learn more when you push yourself to failure, and then you get better. I ran a couple of exercises where, hey, it was really tough, and people were a little bit depressed. I looked at them and said, what did you learn? Well, now you're going to be better the next one. We ran an exercise later, and we actually did a lot better, and we're still trying to find ways to improve. Now let me go through just a couple more things. You know, the environment we're in with the resources we have, again, I said we can't do it and we can't win without our joint partners. We can't win and we can't achieve success without our multinational partners. You know, we do a lot of bilateral exercises. We're stronger when we do multilateral, but that's hard. It's easy to go back to bilateral because, you know, when you go into a multilateral exercise, you need buy-in from everybody. Everybody has national interests. So yes, that's hard, but there's a benefit to going through that and working through that. Is there a time where you have too many partners and you go back to a series of bilaterals? I think there is, but we have to explore that. The other thing we have to realize is there's a challenge here. It's called interdependence. Because while militaries, we operate together and we are very strong, we have the same culture, especially at sea, and I know in the Army, you're out there, you understand each other, there's mutual respect, we're ready to go into a fight, and guess what? The politicians have a vote. And so what happens? You are training so hard together, you know what each other's thinking, you know the capabilities of the leaders, and you're ready to rush into the fight, and you get all of a sudden an edict that says, we're sorry, we cannot participate. How do we get through that? I don't have the answer there, but it's something we have to be aware of. And with that, that clock says 0, and I'm done with my time.
General Malovitz.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I also want to thank the AUSA, General Ham, General Brooks, and certainly General Volosky for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm a son of a soldier. My father served in the 50s, 76th Tank Battalion, the 11th Airborne. He served in Europe, and he served on the Czech border. So for me, being here today, it's a great honor. I'm going to take a different tack and recognize the comments made by Dr. Finkelstein and certainly Dr. Horowitz. I think we think back at what they described with regard to the theater, you'll see how I'm going to address at least the Marine Corps' perspective with regard to force posture. But before I do that, understand that I am the commanding general of all of Marine Corps installations across the Indo-Asia Pacific. And as you know and have heard, we're looking to rearray our forces and reposition those forces as we onboard new capabilities, new technologies, and look to advantage the positions for the Marine Corps' posture across the Asia Pacific. But we're doing something different. We're looking to advantage these positions and move towards more of a joint combined construct. And what I will do is share with you each one of these locations across the Indo-Asia Pacific that are tied to the Marine Corps, but I want you to think about power projection platforms. Power projection platforms. Every one of these locations is a platform upon which we build high combat readiness. It is a platform upon and through which we will project power. And there's a few principles that I want you to think about before I get into the details. Force posture. You'll hear OSD policy talk about force posture. Force posture has 3 elements. Forces, think capabilities and capacity. Footprint, think about where those forces, where those capabilities, and where that capacity resides. And then agreements. Think about access. Think about the access that we have and enjoy, certainly, with our allies and partners. Very, very important. I want you to think about the other 4 elements of OSD policy, how they look at the Indo-Asia Pacific, and some of the elements through which they look at how we might advantage our positions. One, and you've heard it earlier today in the morning, with how we, the United States of America, approach the Indo-Asia Pacific. We foster principles, adherence to norms of behavior, international rules. We also rely on our allies and our partners. Those are key tenets. But presence, our presence is shifting rightfully, and it's changing. And as we do that, we want to advantage ourselves and look at multi-domain battle as long as we can do that over the next couple decades. Then lastly, power projection. When we talk about the platforms by and through which we will project power, how we do that and how we're postured goes hand in glove. Force still equals mass times acceleration. Where we have our masses arrayed across the Indo-Asia Pacific as a joint force, as individual services, both kinetic and non-kinetic capabilities matters. You know that we are rearraying that capability. We're disaggregating some of our capabilities for reasons that you're well aware of. So the mass is changing. Instead of big formations, larger formations, and even considering in the Republic of the Philippines, the loss of Subic Bay, the loss of Clark, but yet the opportunities that we have with the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with the Philippines, a very valuable ally to us as we train with them and help them build their high combat readiness with their forces with Balakatan and other exercises. Very, very important. So think about force equals mass times acceleration and how we rearray our forces, disaggregated forces. We often talk about tactical design, operational design, where before those designs were set on old posture constructs. Going forward with new posture constructs, we're now thinking about, and Admiral Harris has talked about this, strategic design. Strategic design is very, very important. So how we move and aggregate forces and capabilities and combat power from power projection platforms at a point in time of our choosing to strike, neutralize, destroy, deceive, disaggregate, move, communicate, aggregate again, strike, neutralize, deceive. That's the new form of warfare with both kinetic and non-kinetic capabilities. Very, very important. Each one of my platforms here, and I'll briefly touch on them for discussion. I look at these platforms through the lens of the 6 warfighting functions. I am asking about new blueprints for each one of these locations. Do I have everything I need in these locations to enable command and control? Do I have everything wired in for intelligence? Do I have everything I need for logistics? Not only for the forces that are located there, but for the joint forces and our allies and partners that may reside there for a period of time and then move off of those platforms to project power. Do I have at these locations the mobility and the maneuver constructs? Do I have fires? In terms of fires for my platform and for my command, I'm thinking in terms of training ranges. Training ranges and access to ranges that are designed, instrumented, that also include simulation constructs for new forms of warfare, the high-tech, high-end fight across the Asia-Pacific. So as we flow forces in, and I support 1 MEF in California, Camp Pendleton, as well as 3 MEF on Okinawa, on behalf of FMF PAC, Lieutenant General Berger, or our ranges where they need to be to support the Phase 2 formations that Vic just talked about. Phase 2 formations. For us, the Navy and Marine Corps, beyond the MEU, think in terms of the Expeditionary Strike Group with a little extra capability associated with that. And then lastly, force protection, and I don't need to go into that. When you look at this map, some have described the map as checkers. Looks like a checkers board with these power projection platforms. Others have said, when you consider multi-domain battle, it looks like a 6-dimensional chessboard. They're both true. But at the strategic level, it's really the game of go. It's the Asian game of go, encirclement, surrounding. So that's the lens through which the Marine Corps is looking at, not just at a service level, but also considering joint and combined constructs. So if you look at these locations, I command Marine Corps Base Hawaii here in Camp Smith. I command Camp Mujuk. Camp Mujuk, under my command, will eventually take on Yechon and Pohang. We will also build some of the C2 facilities at Mujuk. I command Marine Corps Air Station Iwakuni, the only joint and combined air and seaport that we have in the Indo-Asia Pacific. It is home to the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. It is home to Marine Corps Aircraft Wing, the first aircraft wing based out of Okinawa. It is also going to be home to the Carrier Strike Wing, and Vic knows this, as we RSOI those forces down from Atsugi. And then I also command all the camps and installations there in Okinawa. One air station that we have on Okinawa, you've heard that, is Fatema. Fatema is one of 7 rear area airfields, UN airfield, tied to the Korean War Plan. So as we array our forces in the Marine Corps, which will also include Guam, we are thinking in terms of projecting power not only in the Northeast Asia axis, but certainly as well in the Southeast Asia axis. These platforms will enable that. And when you look at Guam, Tinian, Saipan, and Pagan, think in terms of joint combined, presenting these ideas for discussion, training associated with expeditionary and amphibious center of excellence. Again, sir, I want to thank you for the opportunity to comment. Thank you very much, sir.
Colonel Kozinski.
Colonel Vlesky, sir, thank you for the opportunity to be on this prestigious panel. I appreciate so far the multiple Air Force perspective on our joint capabilities that we bring in the domains of airspace and cyber. Also, for a significant part of my career, this joint and multinational readiness has been something I've been getting after. So I had opportunity several years ago to command a 12-nation, $5 billion, 30-year multinational C-17 program in Eastern Europe. Commanding garrison, then deployed into combat. About 10 years ago as well, I was on the Joint Staff J5 Asia and worked a lot of bilateral and multinational partnerships and efforts. So I hope to share some of those lessons learned. What I'd like to do is talk about a snapshot of the Air Force. I'll start with the 62nd Airlift Wing, Air Mobility Command, and then Air Force writ large and some of the efforts we're going on this joint and multinational readiness. One, and sir, I know you know this well, but Joint Base Lewis McChord is a power projection platform. But I think from our discussions today, we're more than that. I think we are a joint and multinational readiness, production, and power projection platform. And I'll explain on some of the things we do just locally, day to day, to some of the big exercises that we have coming up. Any given day, a unit from First Corps can go to a C-17 crew and say, we'd like to get some training done, whether it's loading a Stryker or getting a HIMARS on. The capabilities that the Army is bringing there at Yakima Training Center are amazing. Soon there'll be an assault runway that will be C-17 capable. So in a local training sortie, you could load up a crew brief the day before, then load up that HIMARS, take off combat arrival, come in 30,000 feet, screaming 350 knots, assault land on that strip, offload in a few minutes at HIMARS, live fire 6 rockets, load it back up and come home. A local training capability. The 62nd Airlift Wing benefits a lot from Pacific pathways, in particular reverse pathways. You know, for example, Indian Army comes out to do training there for the first reverse pathways. They come in Indian C-17s. We're able to talk and discuss with that crew about interoperability. That's a tabletop, but you know, for future capabilities, there's tremendous efforts there, and we're getting after that all the time. Again, that's the 62nd Airlift Wing and what we do there in the region. Air Mobility Command, just as a data point, every 2.8 minutes, 365 days a year, an Air Mobility Command aircraft is departing somewhere around the world, to include every single continent, to include Antarctica, which is one of the other unique mission sets we have at Joint Base Lewis McChord. The only unit that supports out of Christchurch down to Antarctica, probably the most harsh environment, but that is a demonstration of multinational military and inter-organizational operations. And we've some tremendous accomplishments down there. Air Mobility Command, or my major command, is having a first of a kind exercise this summer called Exercise Mobility Guardian. There may be some that have heard about a rodeo exercise we used to have in the past, but that was more of a competition. What Air Mobility Command's Mobility Guardian is about is getting to this multi-domain battle. It is producing this joint and multinational readiness. So just for awareness, it'll be 30 July to 12 August, exercising the way that we fight, building international partnerships, and improving that joint and multinational readiness. About 3,500 participants, 27 nations in total, significant Army and multinational Army participation with 60 aircraft operating not just at Joint Base Lewis McChord, but Yakima Training Center and several other airfields around that area. So those are some of the efforts that we're doing there in the Pacific Northwest to get after joint and multinational readiness. Well, Air Mobility Command has a global focus. Pacific Air Forces, which was discussed a little bit today, again, is that focus here for the Pacific. And they are projecting power in the region, achieving presence by posturing throughout the region and focusing on places, not bases. PACAF conducts 40 exercises and 185 regional engagements a year supporting PACOM and partners. So I want to discuss just briefly some of the challenges with air mobility and supporting the land forces in the Pacific. I've deployed, was a Deputy Director of Mobility Forces in CENTCOM 2014. Middle East and Southwest Asia present lots of challenges in logistics, but that's a mature environment. The tyranny of distance in the Pacific are going to be tough. I think if land forces need to be moved, it's either the Navy or the Air Force. And if you need to move fast, it's the Air Force. But we really rely on these partnerships and on USARPAC and others in First Corps with the Pacific Pathways on building those relationships. You know, things that we need are airspace to be able to fly through, airfields to be able to land in. Those are things that we need for humanitarian assistance, for those things in phase 0, and also in combat environments. So finishing up here with joint opportunities, I discussed the amazing capabilities we have at Joint Base Lewis McChord, partnering with First Corps, with our other partners there. Unique there too, cyber capabilities, air and space command and control. So there's local training that we do, and then opportunities for these large exercises like Mobility Guardian. Again, discuss the multinational challenges that if we're going to support, we need to be able to get access and build those relationships, and we appreciate the land forces for building those for us to be able to bring the air power to the fight. In multinational operations, probably three takeaways I've seen in my experience that within the Air Force, but this is a joint and multinational, I think, truism. One is interoperability, which we've been discussing a lot in this forum. I'm glad to hear that. The other piece is trust. And the other is, I think, a humble approach. And I'll explain those briefly. I mean, interoperability, I think it goes without saying that the need for that, whether in peacetime or in high-end operations. Trust, too, with our multinational partners and our joint partners. It's been said, before you can surge trust, and you can especially not do that in this multinational environment. And then the humble approach, too. We in the U.S. forces are very good, and the U.S. way is a good way, but it's not the only way. So I think as we engage with our multinational partners to be able to listen, to be able to look at that, and a lot of times we go into this, we're a piece, an important piece, but not the majority piece. And so be able to listen, to be that humble partner to determine how we do things best for the multinational coalition. And again, all these are true in humanitarian assistance, which is something we do every day and need anytime, or those high-end fights. But again, building and this trust and this relationships help us, I think, preventing to get into those conflicts. So with that, I look forward to hearing from Command Sergeant Major and for continuing the discussion. Thank you.
Command Sergeant Major. Yes, of course, the Sergeant Major is batting cleanup. I just want to thank General Ham and SMA Presence, and also General Volesky for allowing me to participate on this panel. Because we know it's important, everything that's been discussed, we know we're trying to set the environment and create the foundation for those brigades and all the way down to the lowest level to reach those squads so they can be effective out there on the, in any shape, form, or fashion in the environment. As a theater army in support of the PACOM commander's priorities, at the strategic level, we build defense relationship through nation-to-nation military engagements. At the operational and tactical level, we build relationships, but however, we truly focus on the partnering, the task, and we're looking at the lowest level of execution as far as the task is concerned. Strategic strategies and goals cannot be accomplished if mission command, to include training, development, and education, are not met at the tactical level. The tactical level engagement influence operational interoperability and shape strategic nation-to-nation relationships. In other words, the brigade down to the squad actions may have strategic implications. Our number one priority is readiness. Readiness to ensure our teams at every echelon are trained and ready to execute their vision, mission, assigned, and decisive action tasks. As we set the theater and provide forces and capabilities for both known and unknown variables affecting mission requirements, we must first set forth a plan to prepare, train, deploy, fight, redeploy, and reset the force. Our forces assigned in the PACOM AOR in the Indo-Asia Pacific are trained and they're ready. In a multilateral training and operational environment, leaders continuously confront complex, non-scripted problem sets, as operations unfold and develop. This environment provides opportunities to practice and rehearse real-world mission command at all levels. Leaders continually exercise problem-solving through innovative and creative thinking and decision-making. To say the least, an adaptive leader can operate in an unfamiliar and austere environment. You'll look at, okay, what is known? is that our leaders will conduct operations in a complex environment, requiring a joint force integration of operations and capabilities that will include partnering with a multinational force, the multi-domain, which we've been talking about for the last couple of days and forehand. Our forces in the Pacific AOR are building and sustaining readiness through a plethora of operations, exercises, leaders engagement, and subject matter expert exchanges. U.S. forces and partner nation military forces conduct combined arm and leaders development exercise on a consistent basis. These types of actions extend and enhance tactical readiness and achieve multidimensional interoperability for both forces, as we've seen out there as we conduct exercises here and activities in the Indo-Asia Pacific. An example is Pacific Pathways, whereas you have a unit that conduct pre-deployment, deployment, and redeployment activities. Pacific Pathways has proved invaluable at the BCT level of medal development and providing capabilities tailored towards a regional mission set. Leaders and soldiers are engaged in multiple combined arms exercises and training with multiple nations, multiple nation armies with various capabilities and language challenges, as we all seen out there. These challenges may also include port operations, personnel actions, systems, procedures, all classes of supply, and mission command communications. Day-to-day operations require leaders that can think through problems, mitigate risks, and make decisions that is in real time with real-world implications. Also, it allows U.S. forces and partner nations to build and establish relationships and develop an understanding of capabilities and culture, which is important. This ensures that times of crisis will not be the first time our militaries work together. In a complex environment, human performance is of the utmost importance to leaders and soldiers' success. Our leaders must master the skills and abilities necessary to conduct multiple tasks using next-generation technology in support of non-lethal and lethal operations. And additionally, requires to think through and simultaneously visualize future steps within that time and space. Again, able to think about the next step and not be decisively ineffective. Describe, visualize, and then being able to act. Our leaders know how to think. They know how to identify the problems, develop course of actions, war games, etc. However, they should know what to think and how to think during that point and time. In closing, really, we must set forth developmental training and science of control systems that allow the organization to optimize all warfighter functions of the command's architect. Again, human performance must be a primary focus to improve the overall soldiers, leaders, team performance, thus enhancing the foundation of the squad at the lowest level on the frontline trace. We must prepare the force to an acceptable level of readiness to mitigate risks and never send soldiers that are unprepared, untrained, or ill-equipped into harm's way. Thank you.
So we have a few minutes left in this panel, and I racked and stacked 4 questions here. We won't get through all of them, but I would like to ask the first one to General Volesky. Sir, you got 2, but I'm only I picked 1. How do you deconflict the existing unit readiness requirements, so training and exercises, against the added activities that MDB now imposes? Or said another way, how do we strike a balance between the requirements that the unit training requirements against all the other opportunities that we have in the Pacific?
And what was the other question?
I think the other one was already addressed, so
Okay.
it's fine, sir.
I appreciate
But I will say that the other question was probably addressed with Leo Kaczynski's comments, and it had to do with how can we maneuver the core and core assets in position given all the limited projected air and sea lift capability.
I appreciate the question, and it's a great one. It gets back to the comment about, making sure you have a training strategy that gets you to an end state. And so, for example, when we talk about exercises in preparation for what we're going to do, when I got to First Corps, one of the things we really talked about was if you put all the requirements that you have on your calendar and you look at how much, where your current entry level is and then where you want to get to, the critical piece of this is to ensure that your training objectives for every training event are tied to where you want your end state. So I don't think that MDB necessarily is something that is divergent from what your training objectives are. I see MDB as part of the training component, because what I saw in Iraq is, I believe the tactical, operational, and strategic piece of MDB, it's applicable at every level. It just depends on what assets you have and what authorities and what your priorities are and who is enabling you to help you accomplish your mission. So as I look at, from the Corps' perspective and 17th Fire specifically, since they're our unit that's doing this, because they're a core unit, as we go into Talisman Sabre, they're going to do some MDB things as we talk about targeting lethal, non-lethal. But I would argue that that's part of this holistic effect we want to get at the enemy. So our training objectives for that exercise are nested with that. So I don't think it's separate time to do MDB and then separate time to do your core competencies. My assessment is, MDB is part of our core competencies. And that's what I took away from Iraq is, you heard General Perkins up here talk about, well, some people call MDB as putting, old wine in a new bottle. I would argue that we are doing MDB at levels today. My assessment is, the capabilities we bring, the future capabilities, some of the things we don't do well, like integrate non-lethal fires into the lethal component and combining those or integrating those so we get a holistic effect on the enemy. I think that's, in my mind, where we need to go to the next level. But I don't see that, frankly, as something we do outside of our normal training for core competencies. And so I've asked our Corps, as we go to these training exercises, we go to Talisman Sabres, we go to Ulchi Freedom Guardian, as we go to our warfighter, and then as we go to Yamasakura, how do we get those training objectives that are tied so it's all nested in a training strategy that gets you to an acceptable end state?
Thank you, sir. The other question is for Dr. Finkelstein, and that question comes from Lieutenant General Retired Swan. Several speakers have talked about the vital role that people play in our respective military forces, as we heard earlier today. So how does the PLA look at it? What can you share some thoughts with us on what you think how PLA would react to this?
How long do we have the hall tonight?
4:49.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Guy. Appreciate that. Well, I think like all militaries, the Chinese People's Liberation Army puts an extremely high premium on people. And in fact, it is part of their corporate culture, it is part of their institutional legacy that they try to put people first. But in this current reform that's going on, that began in the year 2015 and that will continue for the next 5 years, and really which is a generational endeavor, what they're trying to do is address not only the organizational problems that they've had in their attempts to become a joint force, and not only the technological shortcomings that they've had, although they're making great progress, but they're also going to focus a bit on the people part of modernization. Realize that the Chinese military did not have a corps of professional non-commissioned officers until 1998. So they really have not yet retired their first 30-year career NCO. Realize that they commissioned almost all of their officers through approximately 100 military academies, so they're not convinced that they've got the right mix of civilian-educated officers as well as academy-trained officers. truly human capital has been one of the problems that has bedeviled the Chinese military over the years, and they're going to work very hard to address that. They're about to change what I would have called in my generation of Army officer, the Officer Personnel Management System. I don't know what you all call it today, but they're about to change, radically change how officers are assigned, trained, assessed, retained, and managed in order to start actually in small degrees rotating for the first time officers through these new joint theater commands that were most recently created. So they're putting a lot of emphasis on the people part of reform and modernization, but that's also a part of their endeavor, their enterprise that truly does still bedevil them. But I have high confidence that there is no greater critic of the problems in the PLA than the people in the PLA itself. They know what their problems are. They're going to try to fix it. But this one really is a generational endeavor that's not going to be conducive to any quick fixes. We can talk more offline if anybody wants to hang around later and discuss it. Thanks to my classmate for that one.
Thank you, sir. We have one last question, and that's for Rear Admiral Mikado, sir. Could you comment on the utility of emerging flexible formations? Stated here was PAC-SAG, UPGUN, ESG with F-35Bs coming online soon to improve readiness and enable experimental test beds in the Pacific.
Oh, okay, great question. The two things that you mentioned were PAC-SAG. As most of you know, we deploy normally in carrier strike group, amphibious ready group formations, okay? But not every mission requires a full-blown carrier strike group or an amphibious ready group. Many missions require a SAG is a surface action group. It's a group of ships commanded, if there's enough of them, by a destroyer squadron. And in this case, what we have done, what Admiral Swift has done, is remissioned our fleets so that they can deploy surface action groups. We just deployed PAC-SAG, actually, to the Western Pacific under the command of the Commander 3rd Fleet. It's different. You know, earlier we had Commander 7th Fleet homeported in Yokosuka, or based out of Yokosuka, that commanded all forces in the Western Pacific. We had an international date line that divided the world. We have found that lines impede progress. So where there's a line, there's a seam. So what we have done now with 3rd Fleet, and if you look at 3rd Fleet's history, it was born earlier in World War II, Halsey fighting a fight. We decommissioned 3rd Fleet, sent it back to San Diego where it did force generation and some experimentation. Right now, why shouldn't the Pacific Fleet Commander have fleet commanders that can organize and fight carrier strike group formations as well as surface action groups? That is what we're doing right now in the Pacific. To talk about the UPGUN GSG, and John knows this well, I mean, a while ago we had an expeditionary strike group before, back in about 2002, where we actually had expeditionary strike groups, or ARGs, and we added surface combatants to them to make them more lethal. That was a really good experiment. We learned a lot from that. The potential now that we have from an UPGUN DSG, when you have Joint Strike Fighter, when you have the Osprey, when you have all the missions that the Marine Corps can bring to the fight. You know, we have 11 or so carrier strike groups, and we want to grow, I guess, to 11. But they can't be there all the time, and not every mission needs a carrier strike group. I can tell you that if you look at a combatant commander and you say, I can give you an UPGUN ESG, I can give you the fighting force of the Navy Marine Corps team that is augmented by Joint Strike Fighter, and like I said, Ospreys and the MEU, that can do a lot of missions, and some of those missions the carrier strike group is not optimized to do. So when we add the SAGs and when we add the UPGUN ESGs to our cadre of carrier strike groups, we will be a much more capable, a much more present Navy that we can provide to the joint force.
Sir, thank you very much. General Volesky, last word?
No, I just appreciate, I'd like to thank my panel members. Thanks for all you guys do on a daily basis. And again, sir, thanks for the opportunity to present this panel. Thanks, and thanks, Danny.
Okay, thanks very much for a great panel to wrap up day one. It was, I think, a very, very interesting day. We'll look forward to a great day tomorrow. Breakfast refreshments will begin out in the foyer at 0700 tomorrow morning, and we'll begin the formal part of tomorrow's presentations right here in this room at 0800. Have a wonderful evening.